I think we're going to get started. Let's try and start pretty prompt here. So, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming out on your Thursday evening to join us here for this conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Habakkuk Synagogue for hosting us this evening. Thank you, Rabbi. We're so grateful to be hosting this in such a beautiful space. And Deborah, the president, the lead, thank you also for answering my endless calls and everything to get tonight. And then also tonight would not be possible with Gail Denbo and Sophie Siegel. They also, today would literally not be possible without them. So thank you, ladies. And then also Sarah Ponzel, thanks. She was sending out emails to you guys. Thank you for your hard work, not going unnoticed. And last but not least, I'm going to give a shout out to the NYPD because they're outside protecting us. We love our men in blue. So, my name is Jackie. I'm going to be moderating this event. I'm a lawyer by day. I guess conservative Jewish activist by night on the scene in the city for the last few years. But tonight is obviously not about me. Today is actually, I guess we're in the ending hours of Yom HaShoah, which I actually think is, this conversation is relevant for that because I think tonight we're going to be discussing public safety and the Jewish community and how we can advocate for ourselves. And with that, we have Maud Maron, who's going to be joining Shabbos in this conversation. It's a name that you should get to know well. She is a, most importantly, mother of 4. She is an attorney. She is a New Yorker. And she is running against Alvin Bragg. Running against Alvin Bragg to, unseat him and put an end to the soft on crime policies.
Yeah.
And then next, of course, is Shabbos Kestenbaum. Probably at this point needs no introduction. I feel like I know him myself, but as I'm sure most of you know, he has become a student activist in the days since October 7th, a Harvard graduate. He's seen what's been going on our campuses firsthand. And he is the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit against Harvard University and their treatment of Jewish students. On behalf of the Jewish community, thank you for standing up for us.
Thank you.
So I feel like we should maybe just start with the elephant in the room. You both are former Democrats. And I kind of wanted to hear from both of you about your political evolution, given the events of the last year and a half, and maybe even prior to that. So, Maud, maybe we'll start with you because you're the one.
I think I'll start because I was a Democrat for a lot longer than Shabbos was before he left the party.
That's good.
Over 3 decades, in fact. And being a Democrat was really easy in Manhattan, right? Because it seemed like everybody was a Democrat. And I will always say that it always surprises me, having been a Democrat for so long, having grown up in a mostly Democrat family. My dad's here, so not a totally Democrat family, but a mostly Democrat family. It just seems to me funny to quote Ronald Reagan, but I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan. He's the one who made famous the sentiment that I think holds true for a lot of people today. I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. And that is certainly true on issues that Shabbos has spoken to very eloquently about how the Democratic Party in this last election was either silent, which is bad enough, or saying really horrible things when it comes to protecting Jewish Americans. And that's part of the problem, but not the whole problem. There was really, there's a radicalism, and we can talk about it in more detail in some of the answers, but there's a radicalism in the Democratic Party that I think is, that doesn't, I'll say this, I think there are many, many Democrats who are not currently represented well by the Democratic Party because that far left radicalism is sort of eating up the party, and there are a lot of normie Democrats who actually think like us ex-Democrats about what they want when it comes to things like public safety and how they want their children's college campuses to reflect like genuine diversity, which means everybody, including Jewish students, get to walk across the quad and get to be treated equally. So that's part of it, but we can elaborate on that as the night goes on.
I think I need to borrow a mic.
Borrow mine.
Thanks. Well, first of all, before I begin, I just want to say as proof that I've never been to this beautiful synagogue before, this is a bit of an embarrassing story, but it just happened 5 minutes ago. I put in the wrong address on Waze, and when I got to the location, it said Church of the Holy Sacrament, and I thought, what a weird name for a modern Orthodox synagogue. So it is an absolute pleasure to be here, be amongst you both. Yeah, as you said, or really as Ronald Reagan said, I did not abandon the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party abandoned me. I'll give you three quick anecdotes to highlight that point. Number one is I was at the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson for the 1-year anniversary on October 7th. I was there with Ben Shapiro, with the family of Idan Alexander, who's of course the last living American hostage still being held by Hamas in Gaza, with an Auschwitz survivor, Jerry Wartsky, and most famously, President Trump. He was there with us. You know who was invited to come to the resting place of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as well? Kamala Harris. And you know who said no? Kamala Harris. We then said, okay, you don't have to come with Trump, there's bad blood, come a different day. And she still said no. So I spoke at the Republican convention, but I also went to the Democratic convention. And if you watch my speech at the Republican convention, I actually don't endorse Trump. I mean, it pissed off a lot of the Trump people, but I don't actually name him. I mentioned him once in passing, but that was it. And I go to the Democratic convention, I say, fine, you don't want me to speak because I'm this MAGA fascist. Fine, don't have me speak. I gave them a list of roughly a dozen young progressive Jews on college campuses who'd been experiencing anti-Semitism. And I went to the DNC and I went to Democratic political operatives and I said, have any of them speak? And I know them, I can connect you. Have them speak for 3 minutes about anti-Semitism. Why should the Republicans be the only ones talking about it? And you know what they said? No. And again, last example is we went to the Biden administration numerous times saying that what was happening on college campuses was not just an assault against Jewish students, but it was an affront to American democracy. We were talking about the needs to withhold federal funds. We were talking about the need to detain and deport students on foreign visas who violated American law, which, by the way, is not bigoted, controversial, or Islamophobic. It's been American law for 50 years. Just under the previous Department of Justice, we've never enforced it. So I think that will be a theme of tonight, not enforcing the laws already on the books. So we tried getting those meetings. We tried getting him to implement policies and to enforce the law, and he was not interested. And in the 3-4 months that this president has been in office, we've already seen the lawful detainment of foreign students, all of whom are getting their due process right now. We have seen federal funding to institutions that have violated their obligations under federal law being withheld. We are seeing endowments for universities being taxed. And to me, it's very, very upsetting that I had to abandon the party that, I don't want to age you, but I have not even been alive for 3 decades. Yeah. But a party that I registered to vote as the day I turned 18. I remember knocking on doors when I was 12 years old for Cory Booker when he was running for Senate. At 9 years old, I bought a Hebrew language Barack Obama yard sign. I mean, I'm through and through a liberal, or at least I once was, and this party so refused to get out of its own way. And if American Jews want to be taken seriously, then the best thing we can do is stop being taken for granted. It is a very good thing, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, it is a very good thing that 45% of New York Jewry voted for Donald Trump. Why? Because it shows we are an electoral force to be reckoned with. And the Democrats here in this city, they know that Jews traditionally will just vote for Alvin Bragg because he has the D next to his name. And I'm telling you, if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to have your issues being amplified and your problems being solved, then I would urge you to stop voting for the party that just assumes you're going to vote for them anyway and therefore doesn't have to take any of your issues seriously. Buck the trend and stop being taken for granted, and I would urge you to vote for Maud, because that really is transformative change. And I'm not saying this because I'm being paid to say this. I'm not being paid to be here. I don't even live in Manhattan. I live in the Bronx. But I am still a registered Democrat, so I could commit voter fraud to vote for you. But we'll talk about that later. I'm telling you this as a lifelong New Yorker. If we want to change our city, it starts with getting rid of the politicians who have so refused to take our issues seriously. It's a no-brainer, in my opinion.
I know you didn't ask the question, but I want to follow up on that because yes, ditto to absolutely everything and all of that. But in particular, I want to say that what you just said about Jews not being taken for granted applies to many other populations in this city. And it really is, we've gotten to the point where there's been an effort in this city to get non-Democrats to register as Democrats under the idea that, our elections will be decided in the Democratic primary, therefore that's how you have to register and you have to vote. That's a terrible, terrible idea because it consigns all of us to always choosing for our leaders in really important positions the least bad Democrat. And we have to aim so much higher than the least bad Democrat when we have the sort of significant and real problems we have right even if we didn't have real problems, you should aim higher than the least bad of anything when you're trying to pick your leaders. But we're facing really critical times, particularly in the Jewish community, but in our city as a whole. And we really, my election against Alvin Bragg is in November, and we really have to aim for a contest of ideas in November. Who's in my election, but also all of the elections? Who is going to provide the best solutions to our actual real problems? Who has the best ideas? And who is going to fulfill those campaign promises? Who is going to leave up really, truly, in the district attorney case, make our city safer? We know that this is an election year. Alvin Bragg is going to start talking about safety again. But what we also know is what we've seen with our eyes for the last 3 years. So I think we really have to, part of why I'm no longer a Democrat, why I'm running as a Republican, is because that contest of ideas is really important. Because we didn't get here to this point we are now by accident. We got here because people driving us to this point were winning the battle of ideas for a really long time. And and elections are one of the arenas where we can fight that battle of ideas.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So 2025 is a local election. There's something shiny at the top of the ticket, which means there's going to be generally low turnout. I think in the 2021 election that elected Alvin Bragg, only 20% of registered voters showed up, which we are essentially allowing the extreme of our party to control an entire city. So how do you mobilize the Jewish youth vote in the city? How do you mobilize just voters in general to show up? Because as much as this isn't a Jewish problem, it's a citywide problem. But how do you also mobilize the Jewish community to show up? I've seen lines of people show up for so many things in the days post-October 7th.
Yes.
It's quite remarkable. But in a local election, when turnout is always low, what do you think we can do to mobilize Jewish voters, voters at large?
Let me give some numbers, and then I want to hear what Shabbos says about younger Jewish voters in particular, because that's a community he's done a really great job mobilizing. But just to give you guys some numbers, Alvin Bragg is our Manhattan district attorney because 211,000 people voted for him 4 years ago. That's a really small number.
Wow.
That's in the general election. That's, he had a primary that had I think 11 people in the primary, but by the time you get to the general election, and Thomas Kniff, who was a great attorney who just couldn't get the traction as a great, candidate, who ran against Alvin Bragg at a time where everyone was saying Republicans can't win. 4 years later, I think there are many communities that are thinking we have to rethink this always vote for the least bad Democrat model. And the other numbers that give me a little hope, and should give you guys hope too, is an election in Los Angeles. George Gascon was the progressive prosecutor in Los Angeles, much like Alvin Bragg, supported by George Soros, really promoting these decarceration, nobody should belong in jail sort of progressive ideas. When George Gascon was elected in Los Angeles, a city that's deep blue like New York with overwhelmingly more Democrats than Republicans, he was elected with 1.6 million votes. When he lost last year, he lost with 860,000 votes. So that is a progressive prosecutor in a deep blue city who hemorrhaged 50% of his votes after lots of Democratic voters saw what it meant for public safety to have a progressive prosecutor in place. So what we need to do in my campaign is build up do lots of good grassroots effort in turning people out, but we need to let people know we have a real race here, because we can knock on the doors and reach out to and text and call and mobilize all of the voters that we need to defeat Alvin Bragg.
Yeah, in terms of how do we mobilize the Jewish constituency, I think there are 4 words: NYU, Columbia, City College. I know City College technically counts as one, but what do I mean by that? Those are 3 colleges here in this district, here in Manhattan, that have been absolute hotbeds, not just of intellectual stupidity, but hotbeds of blatant anti-Semitism, a flagrant disregard of the law. And by the way, how did I get interested in local politics? It's because if you remember at Columbia University, around this time last year, roughly 160 students and outside agitators were arrested for the occupation of Hamilton Hall, which sent police officers to the hospital. They took a maintenance worker hostage. They vandalized private property. They were trespassing. They were smashing windows with chairs. They were arrested. The next day, roughly 130, 140 were released without bail. So we went, together with End Jew Hatred, run by, I'm sure many of you know her, Michelle, we went to the Manhattan DA's office. And we protested outside of Alvin Bragg's office, saying, why is it you are not prosecuting crime? And that is honestly the only solution, I believe, externally, how you defeat anti-Semitism. I mean, yes, Holocaust museums are good and give money to support those causes, but at the end of the day, we are incentivizing criminality. We are basically telling people, if you violate the law, we will give you at best a slap on the wrist. And the students at Columbia know that, the students at NYU know that, and the students at City College know that, which is why every time you turn on your TV or you ask your son, grandson, granddaughter how things are going on their college campuses, we're still in this insanity of post-October 7th anti-Semitism, because we have politicians, and I don't just mean the President of the United States, at the grassroots local level, like Alvin Bragg, who do not prosecute crime anymore. So how are you going to get young people, or how are you going to get the Jewish community mobilized? Just turn on your TV. Just ask your family member or your neighbor what their experience on college campuses have been. And that is a direct result of local policymakers refusing to hold individuals accountable for violating the law. Why is it that I and dozens of other Jewish students at Columbia and NYU and City College had to take a day off to go outside Alvin Bragg's office and demand that he prosecute people for violating the law, and he still didn't do it? That is a damning indictment, not just on the state of higher education at those colleges, but more fundamentally, it's a damning indictment on our local politics. It is so fundamentally broken when we do not have trust in our DA, whose job it is to prosecute crime, to prosecute crime. So that's why I wanted to come here and I wanted to support Maud, because again, how are we going to get young people, how are we going to get the Jewish constituency mobilized? Because we all know, as evident to the fact that you're in this room, that things are not good at the moment. Things are not good in our city. There are massive, massive flaws with how we deal with lawbreakers. There are massive flaws with how we deal with college campuses. There are massive flaws with how we deal with students themselves. And the only way we fix it is to get tough on crime. This should not be controversial, but unfortunately, at least in the party we once subscribed to, this has become a controversy, and that is bad. And I would urge you to fix that problem starting in November.
Speaking of voting, we have voter registration forms here, so
Yeah.
not this, but I encourage you to do so.
Smart.
So speaking of Alvin Bragg not prosecuting crime, Maud, what are you going to do differently to actually help people, give them punishments they deserve for committing crimes like trespassing, etc.?
Yeah. There's, again, yes to everything Shabbos just said, and I think the college the lack of prosecutions for those college campuses sends such a loud and clear message that you can get away with pretty much anything. Alvin Bragg didn't even bother to sort of come up with a good excuse. Many months later, he said, "Oh, I thought they were going to be disciplined at the college." It's like, these were crimes being committed in Manhattan, and the path open to them, the ability to prosecute those crimes was right there. It was very simple. It was pure discretion, and district attorneys have a lot of discretion in what they can use. So that is, you start there with the discretion. There have been many law changes in Manhattan. People hear the words bail reform or discovery changes. There's 2 other major laws dealing with parole and juveniles that have changed that do legitimately make it harder to prosecute crime the way DA Morgenthau, who was a DA for many decades here in New York, it does make it harder. But even with those law changes, there are cases that Alvin Bragg simply chooses not to prosecute that he could prosecute right now. All of those protesters who are smashing windows and who are holding janitors basically hostage in a building for, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, all of those cases should be prosecuted. I also think we need a district attorney who supports getting rid of the mask law. I mean, we need our legislators to do it, but it would certainly help if the district attorney of Manhattan, one of the most major district attorney's office in the city, vocally supported and pushed for that law change and pushed for the other changes with bail reform that we need. Because when you see Jewish students trying to walk across the campus, you can see their faces. When you see the Hamas wearing, keffiyeh wearing paid protesters who are there, and that's something I'd really like to talk about, who are there blocking the way, they're the ones wearing masks, right? Those are the ones hiding their faces. And so, you know what, I'm just going to say it now so I don't forget. There is something, when it comes to mobilizing voters and turning out people, it takes funding, right? It takes effort to build a campaign. If anyone knows anyone who wants to make big donations to a campaign, come talk to me. But it really does take a tremendous amount of money to build up the kind of grassroots. Everyone thinks grassroots happens organically. It does not, because you have to build up those structures. And when you see those protesters on college campuses, when you start to unravel why they are there, it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of foreign money that has come into our city and into our country. some of the protests, the sort of horrifying anti-Semitism that we saw after October 7th was printed, manufactured, and ready to go on October 8th. If you saw in this city the number of the protests that we saw on October 8th, you saw some of the flyers announcing marches for those events had coalition partners on the bottom with their logos printed out on the bottom. Anyone who's put together an event knows it takes a bit of time, even if you've done it before, to get people's logo, to talk about who's going to co-sponsor, who's going to do what, who's going to print out the materials. But on October 8th, they were all ready to go. And one of the things that we need to do as part of the effort to protect the Jewish community in particular is work with all of the efforts that are going on right now to unravel the unlawfulness of that, because it's unlawful on many different levels. There's a federal component to it, and we have a partner right now in federal office who is interested in unraveling some of the foreign money that's coming into our country. But we also have to look at what's going on, what laws are being violated when we have foreign money coming in to support terrorist activity in our city.
Can I add to that super quick?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Here.
I don't know whose mic to take. This
Yeah.
is so exciting. Okay, just because you mentioned two things that
Right.
you're absolutely right and I want to piggyback off of, which is the mask mandates and the foreign funding. So my legal representation against Harvard is a firm called Holtzman and Vogel. Jason Torchinsky, great guy, tell him I say hi. And they're also representing a man by the name of Shlomo Ziv. And Shlomo you probably heard of because you have seen a video of him being rescued by the IDF in Gaza. He was held as a hostage along with two other individuals, and that daring rescue operation where they also rescued Noah Argamani, that's when they rescued Shlomo. And who's he suing? Why is he suing? He was told, and I've met him numerous times, he's told me this to my face, he was told while he was a hostage in Gaza by his Hamas guardians that, oh, look how proud we are, look how great it is that we're globalizing the Intifada, and they would actually use Columbia University as an example, saying that we have collaborators on these campuses. And so Holtzman and Vogel, Jason Torchinsky, they're now filing a lawsuit against National Students for Justice in Palestine and Code Pink, and Within Our Lifetime, all of which are based here in New York City. But what is remarkable is ever since that allegation was made, and even before that, Biden's National Security Council in June of 2023, June of 2024, they had their own investigation, and it turns out they said, again, this is the Biden administration's saying that there is proof that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to anti-democratic efforts here in the United States in order to sow civil unrest before the election. The problem is the Biden administration said that it was a problem, but they never said what they were going to do about it. So too, ever since the allegation was made that National Students for Justice in Palestine, Within Our Lifetime, that they have collaborators in Gaza, there's been zero effort on the part of our local officials to do any sort of due diligence or investigations into these serious, serious accusations. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but we all know that 3 minutes before the October 7th attacks, the Students for Justice in Palestine at Columbia University went on their Instagram, which had been dormant for months, to post just minutes before the attack that we are back and we're looking forward to our activities. These are major, major allegations, but again, we don't have any DAs, we don't have any local prosecutors who are willing to take on these cases. Why are the mask mandates such a big thing? I was in Nassau County when we spoke at the bill signing where we we did the mask bans. Why did we do it? Because at Harvard, this is a good example, at Harvard University, today's Thursday, on Friday, tomorrow, they're having a rally on Harvard's campus, and they've explicitly said in all of the flyers and all of the posters, you must, not you should, not we recommend, you must come to the rally fully masked. Why? I mean, I'm in these group chats. I know what the students say. Why? Because we don't want to be held accountable for any of our actions. We don't want anyone to identify who we are. That is a profound problem. And the reason why Nassau County did away with masks is because they were enforcing anti-KKK measures in the 19th century. And unfortunately, we have to bring those measures back, unfortunately, for the exact same reasons. Yeah. So the mask bans are super important, the foreign funding is super important, and the only way we will really be able to achieve these things is if we have local policymakers who are willing to do those things. And I'm telling you, not as conjecture, not as hyperbole, not as speculation, but as someone who's been in this space since October 7th, we do not have in Manhattan and in New York City enough local policymakers who are willing to take on any of those issues.
So, obviously Alvin Bragg isn't doing his job. But
Yeah.
now we have someone friendly in the Oval Office who clearly can work with the local Manhattan DA. So how does it work with the DA? What is the DA currently not doing that he can do with the White House to protect Jewish students, or how does that work? With, like,
Well, I don't know if they're not really cooperating, because I think without Alvin Bragg, I'm not sure that Donald Trump would be in the White House, because Alvin Bragg did turn Donald Trump into a felon, and that would probably, in the long run, was what do they call it?
It backfired.
No, like an in-kind contribution. But in all seriousness, you could actually, I mean, this goes a little bit beyond Alvin Bragg and Donald Trump. Like I think we've gotten to this point where we're so tribal in our politics, and we see it with local officials acting like the sky is falling, you know, because they don't have the person that they voted for in the White House. We see it on a really local level. I'm looking at Yael. We both serve on school boards here, and we have local Democratic elected officials who send our school boards letters. Our school boards have no power. They send us letters complaining about what we're doing if we're not promoting the far left politics on any number or range of issues. If you are the elected district attorney or any elected official on a local level, you have to work with the people that are in the White House. You have to work with them for funding purposes. You have to work with them because, look, we are in New York City, where we have the NYPD, who Jackie rightfully thanked at the start of this event, has their counterterrorism task force down here. We know as New Yorkers that counterterrorism is incredibly important. If you want to be effective in the counterterrorism space, the local police and the local prosecutors have to work with federal law enforcement. We have terrorist-supported groups and networks actively working, not just in our college campuses, but in our communities. And if you follow the funding, and I sat through a briefing this morning and complained about it being the most depressing way to start the morning, looking at the funding that's coming into our city, this is a real and serious issue that we have to take care of. It makes Alvin Bragg's refusal to prosecute students look light. It's very serious and important, but it looks light when you realize how serious it is that we have terrorist-funded organizations literally working a very sophisticated network of activism and infiltration in order to do harm to our country and to do harm to our communities. And so you don't get to complain about who's in the White House. Maybe it's someone you like, maybe it isn't, but if you're an elected official, you have to work with the federal government.
Fair enough. So Shabbos, you've obviously been very vocal about anti-Semitism on college campuses. What do you say to some of the critics that say this is a free speech issue and it's not necessarily?
That's my favorite question. Okay, I was just on Lara Trump's show like 2 hours ago, and she asked me this question. I just like ranted for 10 minutes. Okay, because it is literally nothing to do with free speech, and you don't have to take my word for it. There's an American. Okay, I'm going to talk really fast, so bear with me.
No, slow down.
Okay.
It's important.
By the way, I just did a panel literally over Pesach with Ben Shapiro, and by comparison, I was fine.
Right.
Okay. There was an American NGO. It's called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions. 4 years ago, FIRE decides to rank 248 American universities as to how well they protect free speech in the First Amendment. Out of 248 American universities, you know what Harvard was ranked? 248th. They were ranked dead last. By the way, FIRE did an addendum about a year or two to rank 251 American universities. You know what Harvard was ranked that time? 251st. They actually fell, which is pretty impressive. This is an institution that, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to state my position on this, but this is an institution that has disinvited controversial speakers who are deemed transphobic, misogynistic, racist, all in the name of protecting minority students. This is an institution that demoted an African-American professor for coming out against Black Lives Matter. This is an institution that unenrolled 12 admitted students when they were posting a sexist meme on a private WhatsApp group. This is not an institution that has any track record of protecting free speech and the First Amendment. This sudden fascination that these universities have with free speech is ludicrous. I mean, Yale University is also another good example. Last night, I posted this on my social media, but you probably already saw it. There were Jewish students who were attending an off-campus event with Itamar Ben-Gvir. And again, not that I need to say it, but I'm not a fan of him. I was actually invited to meet him today, and I said no. The point being, we believe in free speech. Those students should go to whichever speaker they would like. When they were leaving the event, other students started pelting them with water bottles and rocks. I mean, there's video of it. There's only one side in this equation who is targeting other students with rocks and water bottles. There's only one side in this equation who's calling for the ethnic genocide of minority students who are following other students on their way to class. And spoiler alert, it's not the Jews. So if you read our lawsuit, which is publicly available, you should all read it. Read it in its entirety. It literally has nothing to do with free speech, and it has everything to do with action and criminality. It is a total fiction that the mainstream media has propagated, that we can either protect Jewish students or we can protect free speech, when they are not in collision at all. In fact, our Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, when he dismissed Harvard's double motions to dismiss our case with prejudice, he dismissed Harvard's motion in part by saying, and I quote, "It would be dubious for Harvard to hide behind under the First Amendment when nothing we entail has anything to do with speech. When there's a physical assault at Harvard Business School, that's not speech. When a Harvard undergrad is spat on for wearing a kippah, that's not speech. When a Harvard Israeli student is told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made other students uncomfortable, that's not speech. When a Harvard employee vandalizes our hostage posters writing on Kfir Bibas, who's the 9-month-old baby who was killed in captivity, that quote, 'his head is still on, where is the evidence?' writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenges me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posts a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face saying he wants to fight, he's coming after the Zionist mafia, and he's coming after more than blood. That's not speech. All of these things are criminal actions. It is a total fiction, whether it's the mainstream media or, yeah, let's call a spade, or whether it's Jewish nonprofits saying we're concerned about speech here, when it literally has nothing to do with speech. And if you are so concerned about free speech, then it is objectively the case. The biggest threat to speech are universities themselves, because universities for decades have cracked down on misgendering someone, have cracked down on inviting controversial speakers who lean to the right. These are universities that do not champion free exchange of ideas, that do not champion academic discourse. These are institutions that care about their bottom line. And for them, free speech is an easy way for them to pretend that we wish we can protect Jewish students, but we just can't because of the First Amendment. That is total and utter bullshit. I should not have said that in the shul. I'm sorry, Rabbi. Ashamni.
Jackie, I want to add a free speech comment. He got everything right on that, was paying attention in government class about free speech, but I want to just add a little bit of personal color about the free speech issue, because as I mentioned before, I'm elected to my school board, and I've served on it for many years, and Yael and I passed resolutions condemning Hamas and offering support, much needed support, to Jewish students and families in our schools and our respective school districts, and we're very vocal about the anti-Semitism that we saw in K through 12 schools. We've talked a lot about college campuses, but we're dealing with this in K through 12 schools as well. There was a Jewish teacher in Queens who was literally barricaded and locked in a room as high school students went sort of, marauding through the hallways, chanting, being mad at her for something that they saw on her Facebook post with, I think, a flag of Israel was the thing that set them off. And when, in my daughter's high school, when there was an op-ed that talked about October 7th as justified resistance, with lines like, "I refuse to condemn justified resistance," and I was asked about it by a New York Post reporter, and I said what I thought, and I tend to not pussyfoot around these important topics, and the op-ed was signed anonymous, and I said, the byline should read "Coward, not anonymous. If you're going to promote Hamas propaganda, put your name to it." Among other things, I said that our principal should, reach out to, because there were many, many Jewish families at the school saying that they were concerned about this, and why was this, first of all, that it was truly atrocious. Now, to be clear, I do support people's right to say stupid, atrocious, immoral things, because that is free speech. But this particular student newspaper, which was part of a student high school newspaper, had rules and guidelines, and you're not allowed to print things anonymously unless you met certain criteria, and this hadn't been met, and I thought that it was inappropriate to have, and to Shabbos's point earlier, this is something that only Jewish students would be asked to tolerate, because there is no way in the student newspaper that something that was saying that the slaughter of blacks or the slaughter of Asians or the slaughter of women that were targeted specifically for being women was justified resistance for whatever group. It was only Jewish students that are being asked to tolerate this sort of bias and prejudice. And I was kicked off my council. Our chancellor said, oh, no, you're not allowed to say that. That's bullying. It violates this speech code that we have. They call it a code of conduct. And I said, oh, no. I know the Constitution and the First Amendment, and you actually can't kick me off of this council. And I was in court fighting this code of conduct. And to spare you all the gory details, when the federal district court judge, who was an Obama-nominated judge in the Eastern District, restored me to my elected city council seat, it was the same day that chancellor's home was raided by the FBI for an ongoing corruption investigation. So that made me very happy. But the free speech battles are real and important, and we can win them and fight them when we have to, but we also have to do exactly what Shabbos said, is make an incredibly clear distinction between free speech and criminal activity, and not let Jew haters and people who are breaking the law hide behind a First Amendment argument.
Sorry, absolutely right, and I just want to piggyback on that one more point, because again, this is my favorite topic. Yes, leaving aside speech versus criminality, and almost everything Jewish students are alleging has nothing to do with speech and everything to do with criminality. Leaving that to one side, let's talk about speech for one moment. At Harvard University right now, every single incoming freshman has to have mandatory Title IX training, where they are told that fat phobia, that ableism, that transphobia, that ageism, which I'm sorry, it's not a thing, that all of those things are grounds for disciplinary consequences if you engage in those things. You know what is not included in that mandatory Title IX training? Anti-Semitism. So we can have debates as to whether there should be DEI training, there shouldn't be Title IX training. We can have those debates. But point being, Harvard already has crackdowns on speech. They have disciplinary actions and disciplinary consequences for students who engage in misgendering. So it makes it remarkable and entirely inconsistent and blatantly hypocritical that when in my first month of being a student at Harvard University, this is I guess 3 years ago now, we go to the university and say the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, which is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I met in my life, they decided to invite Mohammed El-Kurd to come speak on campus. Mohammed El-Kurd, those of you who don't know, and if you don't know, good job, you're not on Twitter, so well done. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. We don't. I can barely afford my meal plan as is. Number two, that was a good joke. None of you laughed. Tough crowd. Number two, this is an individual who has said that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. This is someone who has lamented on Twitter how sad it is that Palestinians can no longer hijack planes anymore. This is someone who has appeared on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites, which is incredibly impressive considering how much competition there is to get on that list. And we go to the university, we go to DEI, and we say, look, you have the Title IX training, you have the misgendering stuff, you have the DEI stuff. Why don't you apply that to someone who is so blatantly anti-Semitic? And Harvard did something remarkable. They turned to us, they shrugged their shoulders and says, well, he has a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? Now, if that was Harvard's approach from day one, then fine. That's what the University of Chicago, for example, has always been doing. But Harvard has literally never taken that approach. They have always been an institution that penalizes, that restricts, and regulates speech. And the only time they have ever thought otherwise is when Jews said, just treat us equally. And that is at the core of this issue. Jews are not asking for special treatment. We are not. We are asking for equal treatment. And it, again, a damn shame and a damning indictment on the state of higher education and our local policymakers here in Manhattan that we have to go to a court of law. We have to sue our institutions to treat us just like they would treat any other student. So when it comes to globalize the Intifada and free Palestine from the river to the sea, they should say it, because I believe, of course, in free speech and students have the right to say it. At the same time, you can't say you have the right to say river to the sea, globalize the Intifada, but you also can't misgender someone because we'll discipline you for that. That is entirely inconsistent and it's blatantly anti-Semitic.
Yes.
I couldn't agree more. We've been talking a lot about anti-Semitism post-October 7th, but I'm curious to know from each of you, were you guys shocked by the response after October 7th? Because a lot of the stuff has been brewing on college campuses between BDS and other sorts of protests and stuff. Were any of you, were you shocked by the response on October 7th, or how did you guys feel?
Yeah, very much so, like extremely. And I'll say, I mentioned before that my dad's here, and I think that my dad, who was born in 1944, grew up in America in the absolute complete golden age of Jews in America, and I was raised in a moment where, you know, the Holocaust was then something you learned about, something you, you know, it was historical, but it was also with this unspoken promise, or that this was something we all said never again, but it was like in the past, we all knew it would never happen again, because that kind of anti-Semitism was so in the past. And then I think what October 7th did for so many people is this shocking wake-up call that actually we need to have mobilization as a Jewish community to that we're not nearly as far away from the possibility of again as I grew up thinking. And I think that a lot of folks, I don't think I'm alone in that at all, I will say.
I'll tell you just something interesting that I've observed as I continue to give talks is very often when I'm done, people will come up to me and they'll say, how did anti-Semitism, it got just so bad on the campuses and in social media and in our politics? And again, I don't want to age anyone here, but I always say, I don't know, I've only been here for 25 years. You tell me. I didn't do this. So I wrote an article for Aish.com entitled Anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I wrote it in October of 2021. And trust me, no one read it, I promise. But point being, there certainly was this undercurrent of anti-Semitism. It's what I call genteel anti-Semitism, so you could sort of sweep it under the rug. Certainly, the Hillel was not interested or animated in talking about these issues out loud, kind of just pretend it wasn't there. And of course, after October 7th, it just became inescapable, unavoidable, and undeniable. I will say I'm shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised. Why? Because I'll give you 3 quick anecdotes. There are 3 classes at Harvard University that I don't actually believe they're being taught anymore now that Trump was reelected, but at least when I was there, it was being taught. The first class is called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine. Yeah, I know, that was my reaction too. It's a crazy class. In a nutshell, in this class, we were literally taught as fact that historically the Jew has been powerless, and with the advent of the state of Israel, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is in fact by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can now understand why the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, is so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. For my final paper, which was worth 40-50% of my grade, I wrote it on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure in Jewish history, with an epilogue. And in the epilogue, I lied through my teeth and I denounced the religious Zionist values I had grown up with. And to this day, it's the only paper at Harvard I ever received an A+ on. There's another class called Narratives and Displacement, the Case of Israel-Palestine, which again, there's a theme here. They're obsessed with Israel-Palestine. The Religion and Public Life Department, where I study, they've had more than 65 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more events on a country than every other country combined. They're obsessed. So this class is interesting because in addition to being a regular course throughout the semester, they actually slow
down. It's so important what you're saying. Slow down.
I just think I'm parked illegally,
yeah.
so I gotta. I'll slow.
It's
actually,
really
if you're the DA, you can forgive me.
It's really important.
Okay.
Slow down.
In this class, sorry, my mom tells me to. I talk too fast. In this class, it's interesting because in addition to being a regular class throughout, I'm going to give myself like a speedometer.
Yeah.
It's a class that is not just taught throughout the semester. They actually take you to what they call Palestine. I say it's what they call Palestine because the Palestine they take you to is like Ben Yehuda Street and they pretend it's occupied. And I apply because I want to show that I'm a good liberal and I engage in different discourse and all that. And during the interview process, these 2 professors who taught me from the previous course, they say, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I didn't know if they meant because I wear a kippah. I didn't know if they meant because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. And I said, yeah, it's so important. I go on this trip because in my insular Orthodox community, we're not allowed to discuss Palestine, which of course is not true, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. And they said, well, we're really concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, well, if we take you to Palestine, which again is like the shuk, and we show you, this is all before October 7th, we show you the genocide and the apartheid and the settler colonialism and the ethnic cleansing through the process of unlearning, which is a term so monumentously dumb, only a Harvard academic can come up with it. You will be so psychologically traumatized, you will be unable to reassociate yourself back with your Jewish day school, back with your Jewish synagogue, back with your Jewish community, because you'll have realized for 25 years they have been feeding you a diet of lies. And we as your professors don't want to be held responsible. So they rejected me from the program. And okay, one last class again, in under 20 seconds. It's called Religion and Peace, the Case of, who's paying attention, Israel-Palestine. And this professor gets up on the first day of class and she says, in media, in politics, in academia, the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative, which I know we have very liberal laws on marijuana in Cambridge, but I don't know what she was smoking.
Right.
But okay. She says, therefore, in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class, which again is Religion and Peace, the Case of Israel-Palestine, will not study, learn, discuss, or read any texts if they were written by Israelis. So when people ask me my reaction to anti-Semitism post-October 7th, I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised, because this is the inevitable outcome of decades and decades of political indoctrination masquerading itself as academic discourse and intellectual worth, when it is nothing other than a blatant hatred of the Jewish state and a deep-seated obsession and hatred of the Jewish people. And is that indoctrination that we have to root out from our institutions of higher learning. And that starts with voting for people who share our values.
100%. I would.
Yeah. Jackie, I want to add on to one thing about that, which is what Shabbos was just describing is when people are saying the exact opposite of the truth and saying it with a straight face and getting accolades for saying it, right? You're a Harvard professor. That's an incredibly prestigious thing to get to, tell people that's your job. As, how I got here to be running for office is, I was a public defender. I was working at Legal Aid Society. I rather love my job. Defending people who are accused of crime is a great job. Like making sure that people's constitutional rights are protected is a wonderful job. And I fit in where I was and I was happy doing it. And then I started having kids and I started sending my kids to public school, and I'm a big believer in how important our public schools are. And I ran for my public school board and I started to get involved in the public schools, and I started to hear things that are just the exact opposite of the truth. And people that get paid lots of money, our administrators, our DEI officials, our union leaders would say, we have to desegregate our schools. Well, our schools were not segregated. And the schools that they particularly wanted to desegregate were merit-based, specialized high schools, gifted and talented programs that any child of any color in any borough in any place could take the same test. And those were the schools that needed to be desegregated. Back then, when I started arguing about this, this is when it felt, when I wasn't leaving the Democratic Party, but when the Democratic parties first started to leave me, I was on the school board, I got elected, I was coming with charts and graphs and explaining things and explaining the makeup of our district. And I would always be met with like, that's so racist. How could you think such racist things? How could you say such racist things? And back then, it's kind of a relief to be able to say, as you said, this is the stupidest idea and the stupidest person, because back then I was earnestly trying to say, but we all want the same things. We want the black students who are the students who have the lowest literacy rates and the lowest reading scores, we want them to do better. Like, we're on the same team, we're working together, we want the same thing. But this plan you have to get rid of all the tests is actually not good for any students of any color. And I would really earnestly try to have that conversation. And then when COVID hit and our schools got closed, and I was really trying to get our schools open because there were a lot of really smart people, and another reason why I'm happy with some parts of the current administration is because someone like Jay Bhattacharya is the head of the National Institute of Health, and that is a public health official who was brilliant in talking about the harms of school closures for kids. And I found myself again out of step with my party because I was saying our schools shouldn't be closed. And we have plenty of data at this point that children are safe to go to school, that we're all safe with 5-year-olds going back to school. And if they're not in school, there are going to be long-lasting harms. And again, I was saying true things honestly and inoffensively, and being met with accusations about this is bias, this is, you want to harm vulnerable communities, and all of this sort of lefty language, like the crazy pants talk about why you couldn't go into this class. And then, I have said, and my poor campaign manager is going to be like, no, Maud, don't, but I'm going to say it.
Do it.
I have to. Biological men should not be in female sports, and we should not have. And you can agree or disagree about that, but we certainly need to live in a country where you can have a reasonable debate about it and talk about it. And at a certain point, when after October 7th happened, it was like you had people calling Jews colonizers who seemed to not understand the basic timeline of the 3 Abrahamic religions that we, are talking about. So I felt like if you can't just say true things in a simple way, these are not folks that you can negotiate a peace with. And that's why you have to win elections, right? Because we have to say what you have been promoting, teaching to our children, saying with a straight face is not true, it's not correct, and it's not moral. And so we need to have a political upheaval to change things. And in Manhattan, I really think it's important to say that we can have a true competition of those ideas. And that's why I think it's so important to not give up on to running as a Republican in Manhattan, to running as a conservative woman who knows the difference between right and wrong.
And boys and girls. I think it's safe to say that this extends beyond anti-Semitism, and this is also just purely anti-American as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the spirit of American values, we like free speech, so we're going to open this up to you guys. Question. I would encourage you to
Sarah.
mark over there, and we'll hand
Sarah.
you the mic. You can ask Maud and Shabbos a question of your own. So if anyone- Or if you want to raise your hand, I can.
Come to you.
Thank you. My name is Julia. I have one child that just graduated from Columbia, and I have a current child at Columbia. It's been a very difficult journey and very frustrating because I, as a parent at the school having Jewish children, have done everything possible, joining the Jewish Alumni Association, trying to contact the administration, trying to support my children, trying to talk to the Hillel, trying to call the local police department. I've been calling everywhere, and it's just you keep hitting your head up against the wall in how it is that we're actually going to be dealing with this crisis. What I'd like to know is that the problem right now, specific to Columbia, is they're saying that it's largely happening outside of the gates. It's very complicated outside of the gates because it's not just the students, it's outside organizations. And I've been getting a lot of pushback from the local police department and basically throwing their hands up and saying, we can't do anything. Even as students have passed by, who've even been assaulted, they've had their pockets ripped off, there's been students that have been pushed. So what I would like to know is specifically, you share with us what you, if you were to be elected to the district attorney's office, how you would support in supporting our students and in dealing with this issue specific to Columbia University, maybe you can speak a little bit to some of the other institutions in New York,
Right.
how you are seeking.
I'd say there's basically a three-step process you have to go through. One is you have to prosecute those cases, exactly as Shabbos said. There are crimes being committed, you need a prosecutor who's going to prosecute them. That's the sort of most low-lying level. If somebody rips your chain off, chain snatching on the subway used to be a very common crime that got prosecuted for what it was. It's a criminal activity. It's not part of a protest. So you need to have that prosecution. You also have, in the district attorney's office, the ability to do long-term investigations and to collaborate with the federal law enforcement agencies at looking at some of the funding, because it's not just happening outside the gates. It is in the schools, and it is connected to the funding that we see going into institutions, not just universities, but institutions throughout. There's a funding stream that we can look at, and when that funding stream is to support terrorist activity that is meant to undermine America, that is meant to undermine the laws and values of our culture, we have the ability to prosecute. Though there are unlawful acts, and you need to build those cases. It's not a chain snatch, it's not an assault, it's not the simple prosecution that we see, but you have to build those cases. You have to have the political will to want to build those cases and to start to look at, there should be no American, whether you love Israel, never thought about Israel before in your life, or are deeply suspicious of the state of Israel. If you're an American, you should not want foreign powers, whether it's the Iranian government or the Chinese government, and their funding to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, the activities that are going on that let an October 8th protest, a well-formed, well-funded, well-organized, pre-printed protest on October 8th happen. Any American should be interested in building and collaborating with. There are plaintiffs in cases right now that are going on. We should be supportive of those, but we should also have our law enforcement and our prosecutor's office looking into the cases you can build against the people that are terrorists within our midst. I said three things, but I don't know what the third thing I was going to say is, but when it comes to me, I will tell you. Do you want to add to that?
That was good.
I think
No?
Great
Okay.
answer. Prosecutor Maron.
Hi, you've spoken about how Alvin Bragg uses a lot of discretion. And, if we look back to Morgenthau, right, under Giuliani, he's very punitive. We have a huge mental health problem in New York with a lot of people kind of not in the right mindset on the street, and I've seen it plenty of times walking around the city. Where do you say you would fall between Alvin Bragg and Morgenthau in terms of use of discretion? Because Morgenthau is very much a punitive, not rehabilitation. Whereas Alvin Bragg is like catch and release. There has to be a happy medium between those two approaches that's more effective to New York. And I'm just curious where you would use discretion that Alvin Bragg is, or where you would use discretion when Morgenthau hadn't, and where you would use less discretion than Bragg.
Yeah. It's a great question and a really important one because we see untreated mental illness on our streets all the time, every day. I'll say that what Morgenthau got more right than people like to give him credit for in terms of the mentally ill, but what he didn't have was the institutional support. There are some people that are a danger to themselves and others and that can't even keep themselves clean. And those folks don't belong on the streets. And we went through what most people here know, sort of the deinstitutionalization narrative that and there were mental institutions that were horror shows and you wouldn't want anybody you know to be in them. But deinstitutionalizing was, we have that pendulum swing of public policy and it went too far where too many people were on the streets. I have, as a public defender, represented those people, the guy who's filthy with his hand down his pants on the subway, who you walk in and then you think, oh, can I get out quickly enough to run to the next subway car because he's scary and he's smelly and you don't want to be sitting next to him. I have represented those people. And when someone gets a little bit stabilized after in the olden days when they used to have bail set on them and they'd be in jail and they get a little bit stabilized, these people's lives, these are human beings, their stories will break your heart, right? In cases where I had clients where I would talk to their extended family and people who had spent years trying to help somebody, and often poor folks who didn't have the kind of resources, but resources doesn't always solve mental, right? We all know folks who have had a family member in a family that has resources that has suffered with tremendous mental illness. But in the public, in the public defender's office, you have people who had been living on the street for a long time. Sometimes the criminal justice system is actually the only method available to help get that person off the street. Is it a rough kind of justice to say we're going to send you to jail for this many years or you're going to go into this program that you don't want to be in? Yes, it is. But sometimes family members would beg you to help get their family member into a program because when someone is severely schizophrenic and addicted to drugs and using drugs to treat their mental illness, if you're not wealthy enough to have families paying for an endless number of services for you, you wind up becoming that crazy person on the street. And I think we developed this narrative that somehow using the criminal justice system to get mentally ill and drug-addicted people off the streets was somehow punitive, right? That's the Alvin Bragg progressive prosecutor. But it's not, because if you talk to the families of people who are living on the street, they're willing to try anything to get their family member the help that they need. And I think discretion matters. You can't keep people locked up forever, and you have to try to do the least restrictive means possible if it exists in a case. But sometimes that criminal justice system can be used to deliver help for which there is no other mechanism to deliver it. So I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss it based on what I saw with my clients, in the public defender's office.
I think we can do one more question. Anyone has one? No. All right. We can try two.
You too.
I remember I'm a shelter, by the way, we've been friends for many years. I remember last election when Alvin Bragg won over Thomas Kearney. And he is an excellent person, wonderful as you mentioned, and I volunteered for his campaign, and he unfortunately lost. And do you think anything changed? How can you build on it? What is the demographic that will be voting for him, and how can you capture that?
Well, there's a couple of things there. That's a political question. One is money. You need money to build a campaign. Thomas Kniff raised $120,000, and that's not enough to run this election in this county, so you need to raise a lot of money. But more sort of interestingly, I'll say this, is that the one thing I'll say about Alvin Bragg, to his credit, is he's a man of his word. He told everybody what kind of DA he was going to be. He talked about his progressive policies, but nobody really listened. We were doing that intersectional thing of the first black district attorney in Manhattan, and people didn't go to his website and read what he was going to do because he has said it all, and this is what he talked about he was going to do. We don't have that problem now. Like, we don't have that problem. Everybody knows what it's like to live in Alvin Bragg's Manhattan because we're living in it right now. And we've seen it's just dirtier, it's crimier, it's more dangerous, and there's just a lot more really mentally ill and dangerous people on the streets. And there is the kind of crime that is, you're busy paying for your shampoo and toothpaste in the drugstore, and the person who comes in after you thinks, well, I'm not going to pay for it, and they just take the stuff off the shelves, right? We see that that lawlessness, and it sort of infects society and frays the boundaries of our societies. That's what we have to vote against. I have to build, it's my job to build to do the fundraising and to build the campaign structure to make sure people know there's a race and get out there and vote. But I feel like I don't have as much of a convincing job to do as in some other elections because Alvin Bragg has done that for me. We know how bad things are going to get if he gets to sail through to re-election.
Can I add?
Yeah.
I just want to add something. The other questions I can't comment on. It's above my pay grade. My only interaction with mental illness was being at Harvard. But I thought that was a good joke. That's the real reason I wanted the mic. No, but to answer that question in particular, because I'm not privy to how the campaign is operating, but what I will say broadly speaking is in this district in particular, there's a tremendous sense of righteous anger, especially within the Jewish community. Post October 7th, we are looking for change. I'll speak personally. I don't like the political status quo. I think there needs to be a new wave of leaders, both in the Jewish communal space and also in the political space. I think if you are looking at what is happening on the streets of Manhattan, in our subways, on our campuses, and you like what's happening, then yeah, you probably shouldn't vote for Maud. But if you have the sense of things are wrong and we can't simply rely on doing things the exact same way, then we should probably vote differently. And I think that is sort of the secret weapon, this tremendous sense within the Jewish community that things cannot continue as they are now. And if we galvanize enough people in this district, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, individuals with students or kids on college campuses, and we get them to understand that there actually are political solutions to our problems, then we will be able to have, in what's usually a very low turnout race, we will be able to have a significant representation of the Jewish constituency. So I think that's something we can't undercount.
All true.
I will add 20% of Manhattan is Jewish.
Yeah.
Just
Wow.
Manhattan.
Yeah.
So mobilize.
Wow, I didn't know
We
that.
can do it. I've seen our community do it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Like I mentioned at the beginning, the response from the Jewish community was remarkable post-October 7th, people connecting more with Judaism, people connecting more with each other, people connecting more with Hashem, taking on extremist vote, whatever it is, but we can't forget about our communities and engaging with our communities and getting out and voting. It is the most important thing and the only thing we can do to really make sure that there's real change in Manhattan. So with that,
I just want to say one final thing, which is a gigantic thing. A big thank you to Jackie for being an amazing moderator. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate it so much. And I'm going to be here. We can. There's going to be food outside in our beautiful. We got a beautiful spring day to come have some food. Please come out and talk with us. Oh, there you go. Thank you. The most important question. Go to maudmaron.com. You can donate there. You can donate right through the website. I appreciate that question enormously. Thank you.
That's a good question.